Vayikra, God called to Moses. Speaking to him from the communion tent, he said, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them the following. When one of you brings a mammal as an offering to God, the sacrifice must be taken from the cattle, sheep or goats. If the sacrifice is a burnt offering taken from the cattle, it must be an unblemished male. One must bring it of his own free will to the entrance of the communion tent before God. He shall press his hands on the head of the burnt offering, and it shall then be accepted as an atonement for him. He shall have the young bull slaughtered before God. Aaron's sons, the priests, shall then bring forth the blood, dashing it on all sides of the altar that is in front of the communion tent's entrance. He shall have the burnt offering skinned and cut into pieces. Aaron's sons shall place fire on the altar and arrange wood on the fire. Aaron's sons shall then arrange the cut pieces, the head, and the fatty intestinal membrane on top of the wood that is on the altar fire. The inner organs and legs, however, must first be scrubbed with water. The priest shall thus burn the entire animal on the altar as a completely burnt fire offering to God, an appeasing fragrance. If one's burnt offering is a smaller animal, it shall be taken from the sheep or goats, and one must likewise present an unblemished male. He shall have it slaughtered on the north side of the altar before God, and the priests, who are Aaron's descendants, shall dash its blood on all sides of the altar. The animal shall be cut into pieces, and the priest shall arrange them along with the head and intestinal membrane on top of the wood and the altar fire. The internal organs and feet shall first be washed with water, and the priest shall then offer everything, burning it on the altar. It is a completely burnt fire offering, an appeasing fragrance to God. If one's burnt offering is a bird, he must bring a turtle dove or a young common dove. The priest shall bring it to the altar and nip off its head. After draining the bird's blood on the altar's wall, he shall burn the head on the altar. He shall remove the bird's crop along with its adjacent feathers and cast them into the place of the fatty ashes, directly to the east of the altar. He shall split the bird apart by its wing without tearing it completely in half. The priest shall then burn it on the altar, on the wood that is on the fire. It is a burnt offering, a fire offering that is an appeasing fragrance to God. If an individual presents a meal offering to God, his offering must consist of the best grade of wheat meal. On it he shall pour olive oil and place frankincense. He shall bring it to the priests who are Aaron's descendants. And a priest shall scoop out 3 fingers full of its meal and oil, and then take all the frankincense. The priest shall then burn this memorial portion on the altar as a fire offering, an appeasing fragrance to God. The rest of the meal offering shall belong to Aaron and his descendants. It is holy of holies among the fire offerings to God. If he brings a meal offering that was baked in an oven, it shall consist either of unleavened loaves made of wheat meal mixed with olive oil, or flat matzahs saturated with olive oil. If the sacrifice is a pan-fried offering, it shall be made of wheat meal mixed with olive oil, and it shall remain unleavened. Break it into little pieces and pour olive oil on it. In this respect, it is like every other meal offering. If your sacrifice is a meal offering prepared in a deep pot, it shall be made of wheat meal in olive oil. You may thus bring a meal offering in any of these ways as an offering to God. It shall be presented to the priest and brought to the altar. The priest shall then lift out the memorial portion from the meal offering and burn it on the altar. It is a fire offering, an appeasing fragrance to God. The remainder of the meal offering then belongs to Aaron and his descendants. It is holy of holies, one of God's fire offerings. Do not make any meal offering that is sacrificed to God out of leavened dough. This is because you may not burn anything fermented or sweet as a fire offering to God. Although these may be brought as a first fruit offering to God, they may not be offered on the altar as an appeasing fragrance. Moreover, you must salt every meal offering. Do not leave out the salt of your God's covenant from your meal offerings. Furthermore, you must also offer salt with your animal sacrifices. When you bring an offering of the first grain, it shall be brought as soon as it ripens on the stalk. Your first grain offering shall consist of fresh kernels of barley roasted in a perforated pan, and then ground into coarse meal. Place olive oil and frankincense on it, just like for any other meal offering. As a fire offering to God, the priest shall then burn the memorial portion taken from its coarse meal and oil, as well as all its frankincense. If one sacrifice is a peace offering and it is from the cattle, he may offer either an unblemished male or an unblemished female before God. He shall press his hands on the head of the sacrifice and have it slaughtered at the entrance of the communion tent. The priests, who are Aaron's descendants, shall dash its blood on all sides of the altar. The portion of the peace offerings that must be presented as a fire offering to God must include the layer of fat covering the stomachs and all the other fat attached to the stomachs. The 2 kidneys along with the fat on them along the flanks and the lobe over the liver near the kidneys must also be removed. Aaron's descendants shall burn this on the altar, along with the burnt offering which is on the wood on the fire. It is a fire offering, an appeasing fragrance to God. If one sacrifice for a peace offering to God is taken from the smaller animals, he may also present an unblemished male or female animal. If he brings a sheep as a sacrifice, he shall present it before God. He shall press his hands on the head of the sacrifice and have it slaughtered in front of the communion tent. Aaron's descendants shall then dash its blood on all sides of the altar. He shall present the choicest parts of his peace offering as a fire offering to God, removing the broad tail up to the backbone, along with the layer of fat covering the stomachs and all the other fat attached to the stomachs. The 2 kidneys along with the fat on them along the flanks and the lobe over the liver near the kidneys must also be removed. The priest shall burn them on the altar, to be consumed as a fire offering to God. If his sacrifice is a goat, he shall present it before God. He shall press his hands on its head and have it slaughtered before the communion tent. Aaron's descendants shall then dash its blood on all sides of the altar. As his fire offering sacrifice to God, he shall present the layer of fat that covers the stomachs and all the other fat attached to the stomachs. The 2 kidneys along with the fat on them along the flanks and the lobe over the liver near the kidneys shall also be removed. The priest shall burn them on the altar, to be consumed as a fire offering, an appeasing fragrance. All the prescribed internal fat thus belongs to God. It shall be an eternal law for all your generations that you are not to eat any internal fat that is normally sacrificed, nor any blood, no matter where you may live. God spoke to Moses with instructions to speak to the Israelites and tell them the following. This is the law: if an individual commits an inadvertent sin by violating certain specified prohibitory commandments of God, if the anointed priest commits an inadvertent violation bringing guilt to his people, the sacrifice for his violation shall be an unblemished young bull as a sin offering to God. He shall bring the bull before God to the entrance of the communion tent and press his hands on the bull's head. He shall then slaughter the bull before God. The anointed priest shall take the bull's blood and bring it into the communion tent. The priest shall dip his finger into the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before God toward the cloth partition in the sanctuary. The priest shall then place some of the blood on the incense altar which is before God in the communion tent. He shall then spill out all the rest of the bull's blood at the base of the sacrificial altar, which is in front of the communion tent's entrance. He shall separate out all the fat of the sin offering bull, taking the layer of fat covering the stomachs and all the fat attached to the stomachs, the 2 kidneys, the fat on them along the flanks, and the lobe on the liver near the kidneys shall also be removed. All these are the same as the parts removed from the peace offering. The priest shall then burn them on the sacrificial altar. He shall take the bull's skin and all its flesh from head to toe, as well as the foot in its intestines. The entire bull shall thus be removed to the ritually pure place outside the camp, where the altar's ashes are deposited. It shall be burned in fire on the wood in the place where the ashes are deposited. If the entire community of Israel commits an inadvertent violation as a result of the truth being hidden from the congregation's eyes, and they violate one of the specified prohibitory commandments of God, they shall incur guilt. When the violation that they have committed becomes known, the congregation must bring a young bull as a sin offering, presenting it before the communion tent. The community elders shall press their hands on the bull's head before God, and it shall be slaughtered before God. The anointed priest shall bring some of the bull's blood into the communion tent, and dipping his finger into the blood, he shall sprinkle it 7 times before God toward the cloth partition. He shall then place some of the blood on the horns of the incense altar that is before God in the communion tent. He shall spill out all the rest of the blood at the base of the sacrificial altar, which is in front of the communion tent's entrance. He shall then separate out all of its fat and burn it on the altar, doing with this bull exactly as it did with the bull sacrifice as a sin offering for the anointed priest. The priest shall thus make atonement for the community so that they will be forgiven. He shall remove the bull to a place outside the camp and burn it just as he burned the first bull. This is the sin offering for the entire congregation. If the leader commits a sin by inadvertently violating certain of God's prohibitory commandments, he incurs guilt. When he is made aware of the sin that he has committed, he must bring an unblemished male goat as a sacrifice. He shall press his hands on the goat's head and have it slaughtered as a sin offering in the same place that the burnt offering was slaughtered before God. The priest shall take the blood of the sin offering with his finger and place it on the protrusions of the sacrificial altar. The rest of the blood shall be poured out at the base of the sacrificial altar. All the animal's fat shall be burned on the altar, just like the fat of the peace offerings. The priest shall thus make atonement for the leader, and he will be forgiven. If a commoner commits an inadvertent violation by violating any one of certain specified prohibitory commandments of God, he incurs guilt. When he is made aware of the violation he has committed, he must bring an unblemished female goat for the sin he committed. He shall press his hands on the head of the sin offering and have the sin offering slaughtered in the same place as a burnt offering. The priest shall take some of the goat's blood with his finger and place it on the protrusions of the sacrificial altar, spilling out all the rest of the blood at the altar's base. He shall remove all the fat as he did with the fat of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar as an appeasing fragrance to God. The priest shall thus make atonement for the individual, and he will be forgiven. If he brings a sheep as a sin offering, it shall be an unblemished female. He shall press his hands on the head of the sin offering and have it slaughtered in the same place that the burnt offering was slaughtered. The priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and place it on the protrusions of the sacrificial altar, spilling out all the rest of the blood at the altar's base. He shall remove all its choice parts, just as he removed all the choice parts of the sheep brought as a peace offering, and burn them on the altar along with the fire offerings dedicated to God. The priest will thus make atonement for the sin the person committed, and he will be forgiven. This is the law if a person sins in any of the following ways: if he is bound by an oath to give evidence in court when he was a witness who saw or knew something and he does not testify, he must bear his guilt. The same is true if a person touches anything ritually unclean, whether it is any dead non-kosher animal, wild or domestic, or any dead unclean creeping animal, and then commits a violation while forgetting that he was unclean. Similarly, if he comes in contact with any ritual uncleanliness stemming from a human being which renders him unclean and then forgets about it, he may later discover that he has committed a violation. This is also true if a person makes a verbal oath to do good or bad, no matter what is expressed in the oath, and then forgets about it. In any of these cases, the person is considered guilty as soon as he realizes what he has done. When he is guilty in any of these cases, he must confess the sin that he has committed. He must also bring his guilt offering to God for the sin he has committed. It must be a female sheep or goat brought as a sin offering. The priest will then make atonement for the person's sin. If he cannot afford a sheep, the guilt offering that he presents to God for his sin shall be 2 turtle doves or 2 young common doves. One shall be a sin offering and the other shall be a burnt offering. He shall bring them to the priest, who shall first sacrifice the one for the sin offering. He shall gouge through its neck from the back without separating the head from the body. He shall then drain some of the blood on the side of the altar, and the rest of the blood at the altar's base. This one is a sin offering. Then he shall sacrifice the second bird as the law requires. The priest shall thus make atonement for the sin that the person committed, and he will be forgiven. If he cannot afford the 2 turtle doves or 2 common doves, the sacrifice that he must bring for his sin shall consist of 1/10 ephah of wheat meal as a sin offering. Since it is a sin offering, he shall not place any oil nor any frankincense on it. He shall bring it to the priest, and the priest shall scoop up 3 fingers full as a memorial portion. He shall burn this portion as a sin offering on the altar along with God's other fire offerings. The priest shall thus make atonement for the person's sin with one of the above mentioned offerings, and he will be forgiven. Just as in the case of the meal offering, the unburnt portions of these sacrifices shall belong to the priest. God spoke to Moses, saying, "If a person sins inadvertently by expropriating for personal use something that is sacred to God, he shall bring as his guilt offering to God an unblemished ram with a prescribed value of at least 2 shekels according to the sanctuary standard. It shall be prepared as a guilt offering. For misappropriating something that was sacred, he must make full restitution, adding 1/5 to it, and give it to the priest. The priest shall then atone for him with the guilt offering ram, and he will be forgiven. If a person sins by violating certain of God's prohibitory commandments without knowing for sure, he still bears responsibility. He must bring an unblemished ram with the prescribed value to the priest as a guilt offering. The priest shall then make atonement for the inadvertent sin that the person committed without definite knowledge, and he shall be forgiven. It is a guilt offering that one must bring for his guilt toward God. God spoke to Moses, saying, "This is the law. If a person sins and commits a misappropriation offense against God by lying to his neighbor, it can involve an article left for safekeeping, a business deal, robbery, withholding funds, or finding a lost object and denying it. If the person swears falsely in any of these cases involving human relations, he is considered to have sinned. When he becomes guilty of such a sin, he must return the stolen article, the withheld funds, the article left for safekeeping, the found article, or anything else regarding which he swore falsely. He must make restitution of the principal and then add 1/5 to it. On the day that he seeks atonement for his crime, he must give it to its rightful owner. He must then bring to the priest his sin offering to God. It shall be an unblemished ram worth the prescribed amount as a guilt offering. The priest shall make atonement for him before God, and he will then be forgiven for any crime that he has committed." Tisav. God spoke to Moses, telling him to relate the following instructions to Aaron and his descendants. This is the law of the burnt offering. The burnt offering shall remain on the altar's hearth all night until morning, so that the altar's fires can be ignited with it. The priest shall then put on his linen vestments, including his linen pants. He shall remove the ashes of the burnt offerings consumed by the fire that are on the altar, and place them near the altar. He shall then take off his vestments and put on other garments. He shall then take the ashes to a ritually clean place outside the camp. The fire of the altar shall be ignited with the remains of the offerings. Each morning the priest shall kindle wood on them. On this wood he shall then arrange burnt offerings and burn the choice parts of the peace offerings. Thus there shall be a constant fire kept burning on the altar, without being extinguished. This is the law of meal offering. One of Aaron's descendants shall offer it before God, near the place where one ascends to the altar. With his 3 middle fingers he shall lift up some of the wheat, meal, and oil of the offering, and then remove all the frankincense on the offering. He shall burn this on the altar as an appeasing fragrance. It is a memorial portion to God. Aaron and his descendants shall then eat the rest of the offering. It must be eaten as unleavened bread in a holy place. They must therefore eat it in the enclosure of the communion tent. It shall not be baked as leavened bread. I have given this to them as the portion of my fire offerings, and it is holy of holies, like the sin offering and the guilt offering. Every male among Aaron's descendants may eat it. It is an eternal law for all generations that it be taken from God's fire offerings. Any food coming in contact with it shall become holy. God spoke to Moses, saying, "This is the offering that Aaron and his descendants must bring from the day that any one of them is anointed as high priest. It should consist of 1/10 ephah of wheat meal, and it shall be a daily meal offering, with 1/2 offered in the morning and 1/2 in the evening. It shall be prepared with olive oil on a flat pan after being boiled and baked. It is then to be presented as an offering of many wafers of bread, an appeasing fragrance to God. It is a law for all time that the anointed priest among Aaron's descendants shall prepare it. It must be completely burned. Similarly, every meal offering brought by a priest must be completely burnt and not eaten." God spoke to Moses, telling him to relate the offering message to Aaron and his descendants. "This is the law of the sin offering. The sin offering must be slaughtered before God in the same place that the burnt offering is slaughtered. It is holy of holies. Any priest fit to other, it may eat it. It must be eaten in a holy place, in the enclosure around the communion tent. Any food touching the sin offering shall become sanctified. If its blood splashes on any garment, it must be washed off in a sanctified area. Any clay pot in which it is cooked must be broken. However, if it is cooked in a copper pot, the pot may be purged and rinsed with water. Although it is holy of holies, any male priest may eat it. However, any sin offering whose blood is brought into the communion tent to make atonement in the sanctuary may not be eaten. It must be burned in fire. This is the law of the guilt offering, which is holy of holies. The guilt offering must be slaughtered in the same place that the burnt offering is slaughtered, and its blood must be dashed on all sides of the altar. All the choice parts, such as the broad tail and the fat covering the stomachs, must be presented. The 2 kidneys and the fat on them along the flanks and the lobe over the liver near the kidneys must also be removed. The priest must burn all these as a guilt offering on the altar, a fire offering to God. All the male priests may eat the rest. It shall be eaten in a sanctified area, since it is holy of holies. The sin offering and the guilt offering have exactly the same laws insofar as they can be given to any priest fit to offer them. Similarly, any priest fit to sacrifice a person's burnt offering can share in the skin of the burnt offering after it is sacrificed. The unburnt portion of any meal offering which is baked in an oven, pan-fried or deep-fried shall also be given to any priest fit to offer it. Similarly, any meal offering, whether mixed with oil or dry, shall belong equally to all of Aaron's descendants. This is the law of the peace offering that is sacrificed to God. If it is offered as a thanksgiving offering, then it must be presented along with unleavened loaves mixed with oil, flat matzah saturated with oil, and loaves made of boiled flour mixed with oil. The sacrifice shall also be presented along with loaves of leavened bread. All these shall be presented with one's thanksgiving peace offering. He shall present some of each of the above 4 bread offerings as an elevated gift to God. This shall belong to the priest who sprinkles the blood of the peace offering. The flesh of the thanksgiving peace offering must be eaten on the day it is offered. None of it may be left over until morning. However, if one sacrifice offering is meant merely to fulfill a general vow or a specific pledge, he shall eat it on the same day that he offers his sacrifice. But what is left over may also be eaten on the next day. Nevertheless, what is left over from the sacrifice's flesh on the 3rd day must be burnt in fire. If the person bringing the offering even plans to eat it on the 3rd day, the sacrifice will not be accepted. It is considered putrid, and it will not be counted in his favor. Any person who eats it will bear his guilt. Any sacrificial flesh that comes in contact with something unclean may not be eaten. It must be burned in fire. Otherwise, any ritually clean person may eat the flesh. But if any person eats the flesh of a peace sacrifice to God while still in a state of ritual uncleanliness, his soul will be cut off from his people. Any person who comes in contact with human uncleanness or with an unclean mammal or other unclean creature and then eats the flesh of a peace offering to God shall have his soul cut off from his people. God spoke to Moses, telling him to relate the following to the Israelites. Do not eat any of the hard fat in an ox, sheep or goat. Even if an animal is improperly slaughtered or fatally wounded, you may use its hard fat for any purpose you desire, as long as you do not eat it. But anyone who eats the hard fat offered to God in any animal shall have his soul cut off from his people. Do not eat any blood, whether from a mammal or a bird, no matter where you may live. Any person who eats blood shall have his soul cut off from his people. God spoke to Moses, telling him to convey the following to the Israelites. When anyone brings a peace sacrifice to God, he must bring a special offering to God from it. With his own hands he must bring the choice parts presented as a fire offering to God. On top of the animal's chest he shall wave the chest in the prescribed motions as a wave offering before God. The priest shall then burn the choice parts on the altar. The chest on the other hand shall belong to Aaron and his descendants. The right hind leg of your peace offering shall also be given as an elevated gift to the priest. Any descendant of Aaron fit to offer the blood and fat of the peace offerings shall have the right leg as a portion. This is because I have taken the chest as a wave offering and the hind leg as an elevated gift from the Israelites, from their peace sacrifices, and I have given these parts to Aaron the priest and his descendants. It is a law for all times that this be taken from the Israelites. This is the portion of God's fire offerings that was given when Aaron and his sons were anointed, on the day that he brought them forth to be priests to God. On the day that he anointed them, God commanded that this be given to them by the Israelites. It is an eternal law for all generations. This then is the law of the burnt offering, the meal offering, the sin offering, the inauguration offering, and the peace offering, which God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. It was given on the day that he commanded the Israelites to offer the sacrifices to God in the Sinai desert. God spoke to Moses, saying, Take Aaron along with his sons, the vestments, the anointing oil, the sin offering bull, the 2 rams, and the basket of unleavened bread. Gather the entire community at the entrance of the communion tent. Moses did as God commanded, and the community was assembled at the communion tent's entrance. Moses said to the community, This is what God has commanded to be done. Moses brought forth Aaron and his sons, and immersed them in a mikvah. He then dressed Aaron with the tunic, belted him with a sash, put the robe on him, and placed the ephod over it. He girded him with the ephod's belt, and tightened it on him. He then placed the breastplate on the ephod, and placed the Urim and Thummim in the breastplate. He placed the turban on Aaron's head, and toward his face just below the turban. He placed the gold forehead plate as a sacred coronet. It was all done as God commanded Moses. Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the tabernacle and everything in it, thus sanctifying them. He sprinkled some of the oil on the altar 7 times. He then anointed the altar and all its utensils, as well as the washstand and its base, thus sanctifying them. He poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head, and he anointed him to sanctify him. Moses then brought forth Aaron's sons, and he dressed them in tunics, girded them with sashes, and fitted them with hats. It was all done as God had commanded Moses. He brought forth the bull for the sin offering, and Aaron and his sons pressed their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered it and collected the blood. With his finger he placed the blood all around the altar's protrusions. Thus purifying the altar, he poured the rest of the blood at the altar's base, thus sanctifying it so that atonement could be offered on it. He took the fat on the stomachs, the lobe of the liver, and the 2 kidneys along with their fat, and Moses burned them on the altar. All the rest of the bull, its skin, flesh, and insides, he burned in fire outside the camp. It was all done as God had commanded Moses. He brought forth the ram for the burnt offering, and Aaron and his sons pressed their hands on its head. He slaughtered it, and Moses dashed its blood on all sides of the altar. He cut the ram into pieces, and Moses burned the head, the cut pieces, and the intestinal membrane on the altar. Having previously scrubbed the intestines and legs with water, Moses thus burned the entire ram on the altar as a burnt offering. It was an appeasing fragrance, a fire offering to God, and it was all done as God had commanded Moses. He brought forth the second ram, which was the installation ram, and Aaron and his sons pressed their hands on the ram's head. He slaughtered it, and Moses took some of its blood and placed it on Aaron's right earlobe, on his right thumb, and on his right big toe. Moses brought forth Aaron's sons, and he placed some of the blood on their right earlobes, their right thumbs, and their right big toes. Moses sprinkled the rest of the blood on all sides of the altar. He took the choice portions, the broad tail, all the fat on the stomachs, the lobe of the liver, the 2 kidneys along with the fat, and the right hind leg. From the basket of unleavened bread before God, he took 1 loaf of unleavened bread, 1 loaf of oil bread, and 1 flat loaf, and he placed them on the choice portions and the right hind leg. Moses placed all this in Aaron's hands and in his son's hands, and he waved them in the prescribed motions as a wave offering before God. Moses took it from their hands, and he burned it on the altar together with the burnt offering. This was the installation offering, an appeasing fragrance, a fire offering to God. Moses took the ram's chest and made the prescribed motions for a wave offering before God. This was Moses' own portion of the installation ram. It was all done as God had commanded Moses. Moses took some of the anointing oil together with some of the blood from the altar, and he sprinkled it on Aaron and his vestments, as well as on Aaron's sons and their vestments. He thus sanctified Aaron and his vestments, as well as Aaron's sons and their vestments. Moses said to Aaron and his sons, "Cook the flesh at the communion tent's entrance. There you shall eat it, along with the bread in the installation basket. Do it, because I have given instructions that Aaron and his sons eat these things. Whatever is left over of the flesh and bread you must burn in fire. Do not leave the entrance of the communion tent for 7 days, until your period of inauguration is complete. This is because your installation ceremony shall last for 7 days. God has commanded that whatever was done on this day must be done, all 7 days, to atone for you. Remain at the communion tent's entrance day and night for 7 days. You will thus keep God's charge and not die, since this is what was commanded." Aaron and his sons did all these things just as God had commanded through Moses. Shemini. On the 8th day Moses summoned Aaron, his sons, and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take yourself a calf for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering, both unblemished, and sacrifice them before God. Speak to the Israelites and tell them to take unblemished animals, a goat for a sin offering, a yearling calf, and a lamb for a burnt offering, and a bull and a ram for peace offerings. They shall sacrifice these before God along with a meal offering mixed with oil, because God will reveal himself to you today." They brought what Moses ordered to the front of the communion tent, and the entire community came forth and stood before God. Moses said, "This is what God has commanded. Do it, and God's glory will be revealed to you." Moses then said to Aaron, "Approach the altar and prepare your sin offering and burnt offering, thus atoning for you and the people. Then prepare the people's offering to atone for them, as God has commanded." Aaron went up to the altar, and he slaughtered the calf that he had for a sin offering. Aaron's sons brought forth the blood, and dipping his finger in the blood, Aaron placed some on the altar's protrusions. He then spilled out the rest of the blood at the altar's base. He burned the fat, the kidneys, and the liver lobe of the sin offering. It was all done as God had commanded Moses. He then burned the flesh and skin of the sin offering in fire outside the camp. He slaughtered the burnt offering. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed the blood on all sides of the altar. They passed him the cut up parts of the burnt offering, piece by piece, along with the head, and he burned them on the altar. He washed the entrails and the feet and burned them on the altar along with the rest of the burnt offering. He brought forth the people's offering. He took the goat that was the people's sin offering and slaughtered it, preparing it as a sin offering, just like the first one. He brought forth the burnt offering, preparing it according to the law. He brought forth the grain offering. He took a handful and burned it on the altar. This was in addition to the morning grain offering. He slaughtered the bull and the ram, that way the people's peace sacrifice. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed it on all sides of the altar. They also passed him the choice parts of the bull and ram, the broad tail, the fatty membrane, the kidneys, and the liver lobe. They placed the choice parts on the chests of the animals, and Aaron then burned the choice parts on the altar. Aaron had first waved the chest and right hind legs in the prescribed motions as a wave offering before God. It was all done as God had commanded Moses. Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them. He then descended from the altar where he had prepared the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offerings. Moses and Aaron went in the communion tent, and when they came out, they blessed the people. God's glory was then revealed to all the people. Fire came forth from before God and consumed the burnt offering and the choice parts on the altar. When the people saw this, they raised their voices in praise and threw themselves on their faces. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, each took his fire pan, placed fire on it, and then incense on it. They offered it before God, but it was unauthorized fire which God had not instructed them to offer. Fire came forth from before God, and it consumed them so that they died before God. Moses said to Aaron, "This is exactly what God meant when he said, 'I will be sanctified among those close to me, and I will thus be glorified.'" Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, the sons of Aaron's uncle Uzziel, and he said to them, "Come forth and remove your close relatives from inside the sanctuary. Bring them outside the camp." They came forth and carried Nadab and Abihu outside the camp in their tunics, as Moses had said. Moses said to Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not go without a haircut, and do not tear your vestments, otherwise you will die, bringing divine wrath upon the entire community as far as your brothers are concerned. Let the entire family of Israel mourn for the ones whom God burned. Do not leave the entrance of the communion tent lest you die, because God's anointing oil is still upon you." They did as Moses had said. God spoke to Aaron, saying, "When you enter the communion tent, neither you nor your descendants may drink wine or any other intoxicant, otherwise you will die. This is an eternal law for all your generations. You will thus be able to distinguish between the holy and the common, and between the ritually unclean and the clean. You will also be able to render decisions for the Israelites in all the laws that God has taught you through Moses." Moses announced to Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take the remainder of the meal offering that is before God, and eat it as unleavened bread near the altar, since it is holy of holies. You must eat it in a holy place. It is the portion for you and your descendants from God's fire offerings, since I have thus been commanded. However, the chest taken as a wave offering and the hind leg taken as an elevated gift, you may eat together with your sons and daughters. It is the portion designated for you and your descendants from the peace sacrifices of the Israelites. The hind leg for the elevated gift and the chest for the wave offering shall be brought on top of the choice parts designated as the fire offering. It is all to be waved in the prescribed motions of the wave offering. The leg and chest are meant to be a portion for you and your descendants for all time, as God commanded." Moses then inquired about the goat slaughtered as a sin offering, and when he discovered that it had already been burned, he was angry with Aaron's surviving sons Eleazar and Ithamar. He said to them, "Why did you not eat the sin offering in a holy area? It is holy of holies, and has been given to you to remove the community's guilt and atone for them before God. Since its blood was not brought into the inner sanctuary, you should have eaten it in a holy place, as I commanded you." Aaron responded to Moses, "Today when they sacrificed their sin offering and burnt offering before God, such a terrible tragedy occurred to me. If I had eaten the sin offering today, would it have been right in God's eyes?" When Moses heard this, he approved. God spoke to Moses and Aaron, telling them to speak to the Israelites and convey the following to them: "Of all the animals in the world, these are the ones that you may eat. Among mammals, you may eat any one that has true hooves, that are cloven, and that brings up its cud. However, among the cud-chewing, hoofed animals, these are the ones that you may not eat. The camel shall be unclean to you, although it brings up its cud, since it does not have a true hoof. The hyrax shall be unclean to you, although it brings up its cud, since it does not have a true hoof. The hare shall be unclean to you, although it brings up its cud, since it does not have a true hoof. The pig shall be unclean to you, although it has a true hoof which is cloven, since it does not chew its cud. Do not eat the flesh of any of these animals. At this time do not touch their carcasses, since they are unclean to you. This is what you may eat of all that is in the water. You may eat any creature that lives in the water, whether in seas or rivers, as long as it has fins and scales. On the other hand, all creatures in seas and rivers that do not have fins and scales, whether they are small aquatic animals or other aquatic creatures, must be avoided by you. They will always be something to be shunned. You must avoid them by not eating their flesh. Every aquatic creature without fins and scales must be shunned by you. These are the flying animals that you must avoid. Since they are to be avoided, do not eat any of the following: the eagle, the ossifrage, the osprey, the kite, the vulture family, the entire raven family, the ostrich, the owl, the gull, the hawk family, the falcon, the cormorant, the ibis, the swan, the pelican, the magpie, the stork, the heron family, the hoopoe, and the bat. Every flying insect that uses 4 legs for walking shall be avoided by you. The only flying insects with 4 walking legs that you may eat are those which have knees extending above their feet, using these longer legs to hop on the ground. Among these, you may only eat members of the red locust family, the yellow locust family, the spotted grey locust family, and the white locust family. All other flying insects with 4 feet for walking must be avoided by you. There are also animals that will defile you, so that anyone touching their carcasses will be unclean until evening. Furthermore, anyone lifting their carcasses will have to immerse even his clothing and then remain unclean until evening. Thus every animal that has true hoofs but is not cloven hoofed and does not bring up its cud is unclean to you, and anyone touching its flesh shall become unclean. Similarly, every animal that walks on its paws among 4-footed animals shall be unclean to you, and anyone touching its carcass shall be unclean until evening. Furthermore, one who lifts its carcass must immerse even his clothing and then remain unclean until evening. They are unclean to you in this respect. These are the smaller animals that breed on land which are unclean to you: the weasel, the mouse, the ferret, the hedgehog, the chameleon, the lizard, the snail, and the mole. These are the small animals that are unclean to you. Whoever touches them when they are dead shall remain unclean until evening. If any of these dead animals falls on anything, such as wooden vessels, clothing, leather goods, sacks, or any other article with which work is done, then that article must be immersed in a mikvah and remain unclean until evening, whereupon it becomes clean. If any of the dead animals falls on the inside of a clay vessel, then anything inside it becomes unclean, and the vessel itself shall be broken. Thus any usual food that has once been wet with water shall become unclean. Any usual beverage in a vessel likewise becomes unclean. Thus anything upon which the dead bodies fall shall be unclean. In such a case, even an oven or range is unclean and must be broken down, since it otherwise remains unclean to you. The only thing that shall always remain ritually clean is a mikvah of water, whether it is a man-made pit or a natural spring. Any other water that comes in contact with the dead bodies of these animals shall become unclean. If the dead bodies fall on any edible seeds that are planted, the seeds remain ritually clean. However, if water has once been placed on such unplanted seeds, and then the dead body of any of these animals falls on them, the seeds shall be unclean to you. If any animal that you may eat dies, anyone touching its carcass shall be unclean until evening. Anyone eating something from such a carcass must immerse even his clothing and then remain unclean until evening. Similarly, one who lifts such a carcass shall immerse even his clothing and then remain unclean until evening. Every small animal that breeds on land shall be avoided by you and shall not be eaten. Thus you may not eat any creature that crawls on its belly, or any small animal with 4 or more feet that breathes on land. They are all things that must be avoided. Do not make yourselves disgusting by eating any small creature that breathes. Do not defile yourselves with them, because it will make you spiritually insensitive. For I am God your Lord, and since I am holy, you must also make yourselves holy and remain sanctified. Therefore, do not defile your souls by eating any small animal that lives on the land. I am God, and I brought you out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore, since I am holy, you must also remain holy. This then is the law concerning mammals, birds, aquatic creatures, and lower forms of terrestrial animals. With this law, you will be able to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between edible animals and animals which may not be eaten. Thus God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites, relating the following: when a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she shall be ritually unclean for 7 days, just as she is unclean during the time of separation when she has her period. On the 8th day, the child's foreskin shall be circumcised. Then for 33 additional days she shall have a waiting period during which her blood is ritually clean. Until this purification period is complete, she shall not touch anything holy and shall not enter the sanctuary. If she gives birth to a girl, she shall have for 2 weeks the same ritually unclean status as during her menstrual period. Then for 66 days after that, she shall have a waiting period during which her blood is ritually clean. When a purification period for a son or a daughter is complete, she shall bring to the priest to the communion tent entrance a yearling sheep for a burnt offering, and a young common dove, or a turtle dove for a sin offering. The priest shall offer the sacrifice before God and atone for the woman, thus cleansing her of the blood coming from her womb. This law applies whether a woman gives birth to a boy or to a girl. If the woman cannot afford a sheep, she shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young common doves, one for a burnt offering and one for a sin offering. The priest shall then make atonement for her, and she shall be clean. God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, if a person has a white blotch, discoloration or spot on the skin of his body, and it is suspected of being a mark of the leprous curse on his skin, he shall be brought to Aaron or to one of his descendants, who are the priests. The priest shall examine the mark on the person's skin, and if the hair on the mark has turned white and the mark appears to have penetrated the skin, then it is the leprous curse. As soon as the priest sees it, he shall declare it unclean. However, if there is a white spot on the skin but it does not appear to have penetrated the skin and its hair has not turned white, then the priest shall quarantine the affected person for 7 days. The priest shall examine the person on the 7th day, and if the mark has not increased in size, the priest shall quarantine the victim for an additional 7 days. The priest shall examine him again on the 7th day, and if the mark has faded or if it has not spread, the priest shall declare the person clean. Since it is merely a white discoloration, the person must immerse his body and clothing, and he is then clean. However, if the white discoloration increases in size on the skin after it was shown to the priest who purified it, the person must show it to the priest again. If the priest sees that the rash has increased in size on the skin, he shall declare the person unclean, since it is the leprous curse. When a person is suspected of having the leprous curse, he shall be brought to the priest. If the priest sees that there is a white blotch on the skin and it has turned the hair white, or that there is an area of healthy skin inside the blotch, then it is a chronic leprosy in his skin, and the priest must declare it unclean. He shall not quarantine it, since it is obviously unclean. This is the law if the leprous area spreads over the skin so that it covers all the skin of the affected person from head to foot, wherever the priest can see it. When the priest sees that the leprous discoloration has covered all the person's skin, he shall declare the afflicted person clean. As long as he has turned completely white, he is clean. However, on the day that healthy skin appears on the person, he is unclean. When the priest sees the healthy skin, he shall declare the person unclean. The healthy skin is a sign of uncleanness, since it is the leprous curse. If the healthy skin turns white again, the person shall come back to the priest. When the priest sees that the afflicted person has turned completely white, the priest shall declare him clean, and he is ritually pure. This is the law when there is an infection on the body and it heals. If a white blotch or bright pink spot then develops where the infection was, it must be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine it, and if it appears to have penetrated the skin and its hair has turned white, it is the leprous curse that has erupted over the infection. However, if the priest examines it and it does not have white hair, nor does it appear to have penetrated the skin, since it is a dull white, the priest shall quarantine the person for 7 days. If this spot then increases in size on the skin, the priest shall declare it unclean, since it is the curse. However, if the spot remains stable and does not expand, it is scar tissue from the infection, and the priest shall declare it clean. This is the law when there is a burn on the body and a bright pink or white spot appears where the burn has healed. The priest shall examine it, and if the hair on the spot has turned white and the spot appears to have penetrated the skin, it is a leprous curse breaking out on the burn. Since it is a leprous curse, the priest shall declare it unclean. However, if the priest examines it and the spot does not have white hair and it is a dull white which does not appear to have penetrated the skin, then the priest shall quarantine it for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine it, and if it has increased in size on the skin, the priest shall declare it unclean, since
It is the leprous curse. However, if the spot remains stable and does not increase in size, or if it has faded, then it is a discoloration due to the burn. Since it is merely scar tissue from the burn, the priest shall declare it clean. This is the law. If a man or woman has an affliction on the head or beard, the priest shall examine the affliction, and if it appears to have penetrated the skin and has fine blonde hairs in it, the priest shall declare it unclean. Such a bald mark is a sign of the leprous curse on the head or beard. However, if when the priest examines the bald patch, the affliction does not appear to have penetrated the skin, but it does not have black hair in it, the priest shall quarantine the person afflicted by the bald patch for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall examine the mark. If the bald mark has not increased in size, and if there is no blood hair in it, so that the mark does not appear to have penetrated the skin, the person shall shave himself without shaving off the bald patch. The priest shall then quarantine the person having the bald patch for a second 7-day period. The priest shall examine the bald patch on the 7th day, and if the area of fallen hair has not increased in size, or if the affliction does not appear to have penetrated the skin, the priest shall declare it clean. The person must then immerse his body in clothing, and he is clean. However, if the bald patch increases in size after he has cleansed himself, the priest must examine it again. If the bald patch has increased in size, the priest need not look for blonde hairs, since it is automatically unclean. But if the bald patch remains the same, or if the black hair grows on it, then the bald patch has healed and it is clean. The priest shall declare the person clean. If the skin of a man's or woman's body becomes covered with white spots, the priest shall examine it. If the skin is merely covered with dull white spots, it is a simple rash breaking out on the skin, and it is clean. If a man loses the hair on his head, it is simple baldness, and he is clean. Similarly, if he loses hair near his face, it is merely a receding hairline and he is clean. However, if he has a bright pink mark on his bald spot or where his hairline has receded, it may be a sign of the leprous curse on his bald spot or hairless forehead. The priest shall examine it, and if the blotch on his bald spot or hairless forehead is bright pink, then it is like leprosy on the skin of his body. The person is considered afflicted by the leprous curse, and he is unclean. Since he is unclean and the mark is on his head, the priest must declare him unclean. When a person has the mark of the leprous curse, his clothing must have a tear in it. He must go without a haircut, and he must cover his head down to his lips. Unclean, unclean, he must call out. As long as he has the mark, he shall remain unclean. Since he is unclean, he must remain alone, and his place shall be outside the camp. This is the law. When a garment has the mark of the leprous curse, it can be woolen cloth, linen cloth, linen or wool, threads meant for the warp of woof, leather or anything made of leather. If a bright green or bright red area appears in the cloth, leather, warp or woof thread, or in any leather article, it may be the mark of the leprous curse, and it must be shown to the priest. The priest shall examine the mark and quarantine the affected article for 7 days. On the 7th day, he shall examine the affected area, and if the mark has increased in size on the cloth, the warp or woof thread, the leather or the article crafted from leather, then it is a malignant leprous mark, and it is unclean. The cloth, the warp or woof thread, whether wool or linen, or the leather article containing the spot must be burned. Since it is a malignant leprosy, it must be burned in fire. However, if when the priest examines it, the mark has not expanded in the garment, the warp or woof thread, or the leather article, the priest shall order the article having the mark to be scrubbed and then quarantined for a second 7-day period. After the mark has been scrubbed and quarantined, the priest shall examine the article, and if the mark has not changed in appearance, then even if it has not expanded, it is unclean and must be burned. It is a mark of decay that can be on the smooth or fluffy side of the cloth. If the priest examines it after it has been scrubbed and quarantined and the mark has faded from the cloth, then he shall tear off the mark from the cloth, the leather or from the warp or woof threads. If the mark then appears again in the same cloth, warp or woof thread or leather item, it is infected, and the article having the mark must be burned in fire. If the mark is removed when the cloth, warp or woof thread or leather article is scrubbed, the article shall be immersed this second time, and it is clean. This is the entire law concerning the mark of the leprous curse in wool or linen cloth, in warp or woof thread, or in any leather item through which it is rendered clean or unclean.
Metzora. God spoke to Moses, saying, "This is the law concerning the leper when he is purified and placed under the jurisdiction of the priest. The priest shall go outside the camp, where he shall examine the leper to determine that the leper's mark has healed. The priest shall then order that for the person undergoing purification there be taken 2 live kosher birds, a piece of cedar, some crimson wool, and a hyssop branch. The priest shall give orders that 1 bird be slaughtered over fresh spring water in a clay bowl. He shall then take the live bird together with the piece of cedar, the crimson wool, and the hyssop. Along with the live bird he shall dip the other articles into the spring water mixed with the blood of the slaughtered bird. He shall then sprinkle this mixture 7 times on the person undergoing purification from the leprous curse, thus rendering him clean. He shall send the living bird away toward the fields. The person undergoing purification shall then immerse his clothing, and the priest shall shave off all the person's hair. He shall then immerse in a mikvah and thus complete the first part of the purification process. He may return to the camp, but he must remain outside his tent for 7 days. On the 7th day, the priest shall shave off all the person's hair, his head, beard, eyebrows, and other body hair must all be shaved off. He shall then immerse his clothing and body in a mikvah, and he is clean. On the 8th day he shall take 2 unblemished male sheep, 1 unblemished yearling female sheep, 3/10 of an ephah of the best grade wheat flour mixed with oil as a meal offering, and 1 log of olive oil. The priest tending to the purification process shall chant all these items and the person undergoing purification before God at the communion tent entrance. The priest shall take 1 male sheep and present it as a guilt offering along with a log of oil. He shall wave them in the manner prescribed for a wave offering before God. He shall then slaughter the sheep in the same place where burnt offerings and sin offerings are slaughtered, in a holy place. This guilt offering is a holy of holies, and it is just like a sin offering to the priest. The priest shall take some of the guilt offering's blood and place it on the right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe of the person undergoing purification. The priest shall take some of the log of oil and pour it into the palm of another priest's hand. This second priest shall then dip his right forefinger into the oil in his left hand, and with his finger sprinkle some oil before God 7 times. The priest shall place some of the oil in his hand on the right ear, right thumb, and right big toe of the person undergoing purification over the guilt offering's blood. The priest shall then place the rest of the oil in his hand on the head of the person undergoing purification. In this manner the priest shall make atonement for him before God. The priest shall then sacrifice the sin offering to remove the defilement for the person undergoing purification. After that he shall slaughter the burnt offering. And the priest shall present the burnt offering and the meal offering on the altar. The priest shall thus make atonement for him, and the person is then ritually clean. If the leper is poor and cannot afford the above sacrifices, he shall take 1 male sheep as a guilt offering. This shall be the wave offering to atone for him. He shall also take 1/10 ephah of the best grade wheat meal mixed with oil as a meal offering, and a log of olive oil. In addition, he shall bring 2 turtle doves or 2 young common doves as he can afford, 1 for a sin offering and 1 for a burnt offering. On the 8th day of his purification he shall bring them to the priest to the communion tent entrance before God. The priest shall take the guilt offering sheep and the log of oil and wave them in the motions prescribed for a wave offering before God. He shall slaughter the guilt offering sheep. The priest shall take the blood of the guilt offering and place it on the right earlobe, the right thumb, and the right big toe of the person undergoing purification. The priest shall then pour some of the oil onto the left hand of another priest with his right finger. This second priest shall sprinkle some of the oil on his left hand 7 times before God. The priest shall place some of the oil from his hand on the right earlobe, right thumb, and right big toe of the person undergoing purification, right over the place where the blood of the guilt offering was put. The priest shall then place the rest of the oil that is in his hand on the head of the person undergoing purification. With all this he shall make atonement for the person before God. He shall then prepare 1 of the turtle doves or young common doves that the person was able to afford. Taking this offering that the person could afford, the priest shall sacrifice 1 bird as a sin offering and 1 as a meal offering, and then present the meal offering. The priest shall thus make atonement before God for the person undergoing purification. The above is the entire law concerning the person who has the mark of the leprous curse on him and who cannot afford more for his purification.
God spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, when you come to the land of Canaan, which I am giving to you as an inheritance, I will place the mark of the leprous curse in houses in the land you inherit. The owner of the house shall come and tell the priest, it looks to me as if there is something like a leprous mark in the house. The priest shall give orders that the house be emptied out before any priest comes to see the mark, so that everything in the house will not become unclean. Only then shall a priest come to see the house. He shall examine the mark to determine if the mark on the wall of the house consists of penetrating streaks that are bright green or bright red, which appear to be below the surface of the wall. If they are, the priest shall leave the house and stand just outside the entrance of the house. The priest shall then quarantine the house for 7 days. On the 7th day he shall return and examine it to determine whether or not the mark has expanded on the wall of the house. If it has, the priest shall give orders that people remove the stones having the mark, and that they throw the stones outside the city in an unclean place. He shall then have the inside of the house scraped off all round the mark, and the people doing it shall discard the removed dust outside the city in an unclean place. The people shall take other stones to replace the removed stones. The owner shall then plaster the entire house with new clay. If after the stones have been removed and the house has been scraped and replastered, the mark comes back, the priest shall return and examine it. If the mark has spread in the house again, it is a malignant leprous mark which is unclean. The priest must order that the house be demolished, and its stones, wood, and all the clay from the house shall be brought outside the city to an unclean place. As long as the house is in quarantine, anyone entering it shall be unclean until evening. If one remains in the house long enough to relax, he must immerse both his body and his clothing. However, he must immerse his clothing only if he has remained in the house long enough to eat a small meal. However, if the priest returns at the end of the 7 days after the house has been replastered, and he sees that the mark has not reappeared in the house, then the mark has gone away, and the priest shall declare the house clean. To purify the house, he shall order 2 birds, a piece of cedar, some crimson wool, and a hyssop branch. He shall slaughter 1 bird over fresh spring water in a clay bowl. He shall then take the piece of cedar, the hyssop, the crimson wool, and the live bird, dip them in the blood of the slaughtered bird and fresh spring water, and sprinkle it on the house 7 times. Thus with the bird's blood and spring water, along with the live bird, cedar wood, hyssop, and crimson wool, he shall purify the house. He shall then send the live bird outside the city toward the fields. In this manner he shall make atonement for the house, and it is then clean. The bow is the entire law for every leprous mark, bald patch, leprous mark in a garment or house, and white blotch, discoloration or spot on the skin, so that decisions can be rendered as to the day one is rendered clean and the day one is rendered unclean. This is the entire law concerning the leprous curse. God spoke to Moses and Aaron, telling them to speak to the Israelites and tell them as follows: when a man has a discharge from his organ, this discharge can render his unclean. He becomes unclean through a discharge if his organ dribbles with the discharge, or if he has some of it stuck to his organ. This makes him unclean, so that any bed upon which the man with the discharge lies is unclean, and any object upon which he sits is also unclean. Any person who touches the man's bed must immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah, and then remain unclean until evening. Similarly, anyone who sits on an object upon which the man with a discharge has been sitting must also immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah, and then remain unclean until evening. If anyone touches the body of the person with the discharge, he must similarly immerse his clothing and his body, and then remain unclean until evening. If the saliva of the man with a discharge comes in contact with a ritually clean person, the latter must immerse his clothing and his body, and then remain unclean until evening. Every saddle upon which the person with the discharge rides shall be unclean. Thus anyone who touches something that has been under the man with a discharge shall be unclean until evening. One who lifts such an object must immerse both his clothing and his body, and then remain unclean until evening. If anyone touches a man with a discharge who has not immersed even his hands in a mikvah, then that person must immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah, and then remain unclean until evening. If the man with a discharge touches the inside of a clay vessel, it must be broken. If it is a wooden vessel, it must be immersed in a mikvah. When the man is healed of his discharge, he must count 7 days for his purification. He shall then immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah of running spring water. On the 8th day he shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 young common doves, and coming before God to the communion tent entrance, he shall give them to the priest. The priest shall prepare 1 bird as a sin offering and 1 as a burnt offering. The priest shall thus make atonement before God for the person, thus purifying him of his discharge. When a man discharges semen, he must immerse his entire body in a mikvah and then remain unclean until evening. If any cloth or leather gets any semen on it, it must be immersed in a mikvah and then remain unclean until evening. If a woman has intercourse with a man, he has a seminal discharge. Both of them shall immerse in a mikvah and then remain unclean until evening. When a woman has a discharge, it can consist of any blood that emerges from her body. For 7 days she is then ritually unclean because of her menstruation, and anyone touching her shall be unclean until evening. As long as she is in her menstrual state, anything upon which she lies shall be unclean, and anyone sitting on it is likewise unclean. Whoever touches her bed must immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah, and they remain unclean until evening. Similarly, anyone who sits on any article upon which he has sat must immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah and then remain unclean until evening. Thus, if he is on the bed or any other article upon which he sat, whether he touches it or not, he is unclean until evening. If a man has intercourse with such a woman, her menstrual impurity is transferred to him, and he shall be unclean for 7 days. Any bed upon which he lies shall be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for a number of days when it is not time for a menstrual period, or if she has such a discharge right after her period, then as long as she has this discharge, she is unclean, just as she is when she has a period. Thus, as long as she has a discharge, any bed upon which she lies shall have the same status as it has while she is menstruating. Similarly, any article upon which she sits shall be unclean, just as it is unclean when she is menstruating. Anyone touching these articles must similarly immerse his clothing and his body in a mikvah, and they remain unclean until evening. When the woman is rid of her discharge, she must count 7 days for herself, and only then can she undergo purification. On the 8th day she shall take for herself 2 turtle doves or 2 young common doves, and bring them to the priest, to the communion tent entrance. The priest shall prepare 1 as a sin offering and 1 as a burnt offering, and the priest shall thus make atonement for her before God, purifying her from her unclean discharge. You, Moses and Aaron, must warn the Israelites about their impurity, so that their impurity not cause them to die if they defile the tabernacle that I have placed among them. This then is the entire law concerning the man who is unclean because of a discharge or seminal emission, as well as the woman who has a monthly period, the man or woman who has a genital.
Acharimot. God spoke to Moses right after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, who brought an unauthorized offering before God and died. God says to Moses, "Speak to your brother Aaron, and let him not enter the inner sanctuary that is beyond the partition concealing the ark, so that he may not die, since I appear over the ark cover in a cloud." When Aaron enters this inner sanctuary, it must be with a young bull for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He must put on a sanctified white linen tunic and have linen pants on his body. He must also gird himself with a linen sash and bind his head with a linen turban. These are sacred vestments, and therefore before putting them on he must immerse in a mikvah. From the Israelite community he shall also take 2 goats for sin offerings and 1 ram for a burnt offering. He shall begin by presenting his own sin offering bull and atoning for himself and his family. He shall then take the 2 goats and stand them before God at the communion tent entrance. Aaron shall place 2 lots on the 2 goats, 1 lot marked for God and 1 marked for Azazel. Aaron shall present the goat that has the lot for God, so that it will later be prepared as a sin offering. The goat that has the lot for Azazel shall remain alive before God, so that Aaron will later be able to make atonement on it and send it to Azazel in the desert. Aaron shall present his sin offering bull and make atonement for himself and his fellow priests. He shall then slaughter his bull as a sin offering. He shall take a fire pan full of burning coals from the side of the altar that is toward God, along with a double handful of finely pulverized perfume incense, and bring them both into the inner sanctuary beyond the cloth partition. There before God he shall place the incense on the fire, so that the smoke from the incense covers the ark cover over the tablets of testimony. Then he will not die. He shall take some of the bull's blood, and with his forefinger sprinkle it once above the east side of the ark cover. He shall then sprinkle with his forefinger 7 times directly toward the ark cover. He shall then slaughter the people's sin offering goat and bring its blood into the inner sanctuary beyond the cloth partition. He shall do the same with this blood as he did with the bull's blood, sprinkling it both above the ark cover and directly toward the ark cover. With this he will make atonement for the Israelites' defilement as well as for their rebellious acts and all their inadvertent misdeeds. He shall then perform exactly the same ritual in the communion tent which remains with the Israelites even when they are unclean. No one else shall be in the communion tent from the time that Aaron enters the sanctuary to make atonement until he leaves. In this manner he shall make atonement for himself, for his family, and for the entire Israelite community. He shall then go out to the altar that is before God and make atonement on it. He shall do this by taking some of the bull's and goat's blood and placing the mixture on the altar's horns all around. He shall sprinkle the blood on it 7 times with his forefinger. Through this he shall purify and sanctify it from any defilement on the part of the Israelites. When he thus finishes making atonement in the inner sanctuary, in the communion tent, and on the altar, he shall present the live goat. Aaron shall press both his hands on the live goat's head, and he shall confess on it all the Israelites' sins, rebellious acts, and inadvertent misdeeds. When he has thus placed them on the goat's head, he shall send it to the desert with a specially prepared man. The goat will thus carry all the sins away to a desolate area when it is sent to the desert. Aaron shall then go into the communion tent and take off the white linen vestments that he wore when he entered the inner sanctuary. He shall leave these vestments there. He shall immerse his body in a mikvah in the sanctified area and put on his regular vestments. He shall then go out and complete his own burnt offering and the people's burnt offering, thus atoning for himself and the people. He shall also burn the choice parts of the sin offering on the altar. The one who sends the goat to Azazel shall immerse his clothing and body in a mikvah. Only then can he enter the camp. The bull and goat presented as sin offerings, whose blood was brought into the inner sanctuary to make atonement, shall be brought outside the camp. There their skin, flesh, and entrails shall be burnt in fire. The one who burns them shall immerse his clothing and body in a mikvah, and he may then come back into the camp. All this shall be an eternal law for you each year. On the 10th day of the 7th month you must fast and not do any work. This is true of both the native born and the proselyte who joins you. This is because on this day you shall have all your sins atoned, so that you will be cleansed. Before God you will be cleansed of all your sins. It is a Sabbath of Sabbaths to you, and a day upon which you must fast. This is a law for all time. The priest who is anointed and installed to be high priest in his ancestor's place shall make this atonement wearing the sacred vestments of white linen. He shall be the one to make atonement in the holy inner sanctuary, in the communion tent, and on the altar. The atonement that he makes shall be for the priest and for the people of the community. All this shall be for you as a law for all time, so that the Israelites will be able to gain atonement for their sins once each year. Aaron later did exactly as God had commanded Moses. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to Aaron, his sons, and the other Israelites, telling them that the following is literally what God commanded. If any member of the family of Israel sacrifices an ox, sheep, or goat, whether in the camp or outside the camp, and does not bring it to the communion tent to be offered as a sacrifice to God before his sanctuary, that person is considered a murderer. That person has committed an act of murder, and he shall be cut off spiritually from among his people. The Israelites shall thus take the sacrifices that they are offering in the fields and bring them to God to the communion tent entrance, where they are given to the priest. They can then be offered as peace offerings to God. The priest will then dash the blood on God's altar at the communion tent's entrance and burn the choice parts as an appeasing fragrance to God. The Israelites will then stop sacrificing to the demons who continue to tempt them. This shall be an eternal law for them for all generations. Also tell them that if any person, whether from the family of Israel or a proselyte who joins them, prepares a burnt offering or other sacrifice and does not bring it to the communion tent to present it to God, that person shall be cut off spiritually from his people. If any person, whether of the family of Israel or a proselyte who joins them, eats any blood, I will direct my anger against the person who eats blood and cut him off spiritually from among his people. This is because the life force of the flesh is in the blood. And I therefore gave it to you to be placed on the altar to atone for your lives. It is the blood that atones for a life. And I therefore told the Israelites, let none of you eat blood. A proselyte who joins you shall likewise not eat blood. If any man, whether of the family of Israel or a proselyte who joins them, traps an animal or bird that may be eaten and spills its blood, he must cover the blood with earth. All this is because every living creature has its blood associated with its life force. Tell the Israelites not to eat any blood, since the life force of all flesh is in its blood. Whoever eats it shall be cut off spiritually. If any person, whether native born or proselyte, eats a creature which has died on its own and which is forbidden only because it has a fatal lesion, he must immerse his clothes and his body in a mikvah. He then remains unclean until evening, whereupon he is clean. If he does not immerse his clothing and body, then he can bear his guilt. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites and say to them, I am God. Do not follow the ways of Egypt where you once lived, nor of Canaan where I will be bringing you. Do not follow any of their customs. Follow my laws and be careful to keep my decrees, for I am God your Lord. Keep my decrees and laws, since it is only by keeping them that a person can truly live. I am God. No person shall approach a close relative to commit a sexual offense. I am God. Do not commit a sexual offense against your father or mother. If a woman is your mother, you must not commit incest with her. Do not commit incest with your father's wife, since this is a sexual offense against your father. Do not commit incest with your sister, even if she is the daughter of only your father or mother, whether she is legitimate or illegitimate, you must not commit incest with her. Do not commit incest with your son's daughter or your daughter's daughter, since this is a sexual crime against yourself. Do not commit incest with the daughter that your father's wife has borne to your father. She is your sister and you must not commit incest with her. Do not commit incest with your father's sister, since she is your father's blood relative. Do not commit incest with your mother's sister, since she is your mother's blood relative. Do not commit a sexual offense against your father's brother by having sexual contact with his wife. She is your aunt. Do not commit incest with your daughter-in-law. She is your son's wife. You must not commit incest with her. Do not commit incest with your brother's wife, since this is a sexual offense against your brother. Do not commit incest by marrying a woman and her daughter. Do not even take her son's daughter or her daughter's daughter, since this constitutes incest. Since they are blood relatives, it is a perversion. Do not marry a woman and then take her sister as a rival to her as long as the first one is alive. Do not come close to a woman who is ritually unclean because of her menstruation, since this is a sexual offense. Do not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife, since this will defile her. Do not give any of your children to be initiated to Molech, so that you not profane your God's name. I am God. Do not lie with a male as you would with a woman, since this is a disgusting perversion. Do not perform any sexual act with an animal, since it will defile you. A woman shall likewise not give herself to an animal and allow it to mate with her. This is an utterly detestable perversion. Do not let yourselves be defiled by any of these acts. It was as a result of them that the nations that I am driving away before you became defiled. The land became defiled, and when I directed my providence at the sin committed there, the land vomited out its inhabitants. You, however, must keep my decrees and laws and not become involved in any of these disgusting perversions, neither the native born nor any foreigner who settles among you. The people who lived in the land before you did all these disgusting perversions and defiled the land. But you shall not cause the land to vomit you out when you defile it, as it vomited out the nation that was there before you. Thus, whenever anyone does any of these disgusting perversions, all the people involved shall be cut off spiritually from the midst of the people. Keep my charge, and do not follow any of the perverted customs that were kept before you arrived, so that you not be defiled by them. I am God, your Lord.
Kedoshim. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the entire Israelite community and say to them, you must be holy, since I am God your Lord and I am holy. Every person must respect his mother and father and keep my Sabbaths. I am God your Lord. Do not turn aside to false gods and do not make yourselves God out of cast metal. I am God your Lord. When you offer a peace sacrifice to God, you shall do so of your own free will. You can eat it on the day you sacrifice it and on the next day, but anything left over until the third day must be burned in fire. If one even plans to eat it on the third day, it is considered putrid and it is not acceptable. If one then eats it, he has desecrated that which is holy to God, and he shall bear his guilt. Such a person shall be cut off spiritually from his people. When you reap your land's harvest, do not completely harvest the ends of your fields. Also do not pick up individual stalks that have fallen. Furthermore, do not pick the incompletely formed grape clusters in your vineyards. Also do not pick up individual fallen grapes in your vineyards. All the above must be left for the poor and the stranger. I am God your Lord. Do not steal, do not deny a rightful claim. Do not lie to one another. Do not swear falsely by my name. If you do so, you will be desecrating your God's name. I am God. Do not unjustly withhold that which is due your neighbor. Do not let a worker's wages remain with you overnight until morning. Do not curse even the deaf. Do not place a stumbling block before the morally blind. You must fear God. I am God. Do not pervert justice. Do not give special consideration to the poor, nor show respect to the great. Judge your people fairly. Do not go around as a gossiper among your people. Do not stand still when your neighbor's life is in danger. I am God. Do not hate your brother in your heart. You must admonish your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. Do not take revenge nor bear a grudge against the children of your people. You must love your neighbor as you love yourself. I am God. Keep my decrees. Do not crossbreed your livestock with other species. Do not plant your field with different species of seeds. Do not wear a garment that contains a forbidden mixture of fabrics. If a man lies carnally with a slave woman who is half married to another man, and she has not been redeemed or given her freedom, she must be physically punished. However, since she has not been freed, the two shall not be put to death. The man must bring his guilt offering to God to the communion tent entrance. It shall be a ram for a guilt offering. The priest shall make atonement for him before God with the guilt offering ram for the sin that he committed. He will thus gain forgiveness for his sin. When you come to the promised land and plant any tree bearing edible fruit, you must avoid its fruit as a forbidden growth. For 3 years the fruit shall be a forbidden growth, and it may not be eaten. Then in the 4th year all the tree's fruit shall be holy, and it shall be something for which God is praised. In the 5th year you may eat its fruit and thus increase your crops. I am God your Lord. Do not eat on blood. Do not act on the basis of omens. Do not act on the basis of auspicious times. Do not cut off the hair on the sides of your head. Do not shave off the edges of your beard. Do not make gashes in your skin for the dead. Do not make any tattoos marks on your skin. I am God. Do not defile your daughter with premarital sex. You will then not make the land sexually immoral, and the land will not be filled with perversion. Keep my Sabbaths and reverse my sanctuary. I am God. Do not turn to mediums, nor seek out oracles, so as to defile yourselves through them. I am God your Lord. Stand up before a white head and give respect to the old. You shall thus fear your God. I am God. When a proselyte comes to live in your land, do not hurt his feelings. The foreigner who becomes a proselyte must be exactly like one who is native born among you. You shall love him as you love yourself. for you were foreigners in Egypt. I am God your Lord. Do not falsify measurements, whether in length, weight or volume. You must have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest dry measure, and an honest liquid measure. I am God your Lord who took you out of Egypt. Safeguard my decrees and all my laws and keep them. I am God. God spoke to Moses telling him to say the following to the Israelites. If any person, whether a born Israelite or a proselyte who joins Israel, gives any of his children to Molech, he must be put to death. The local people must pelt him to death with stones. I will direct my anger against that person and will cut him off spiritually from among his people, since he has given his children to Molech, thus defiling that which is holy to me and profaning my holy name. Therefore, if the people ignore the fact that this person has given his children to Molech and they do not kill him, I will direct my anger against that person and his family. I will cut him off spiritually from among his people, along with all those who are missed by him to prostitute themselves to Molech. If a person turns to the mediums and oracles so as to prostitute himself to their ways, I will direct my anger against him and cut him off spiritually from his people. You must sanctify yourself and be holy, for I am God your Lord. Safeguard my decrees and keep them, since I am God and I am making you holy. Any person who curses his father or mother shall therefore be put to death. Since he has cursed his father or mother, he shall be stoned to death. If a man commits adultery with a married woman and she is the wife of a fellow Israelite, both the adulterer and adulteress shall be put to death. If a man has intercourse with his father's wife, he has committed a sexual offense against his father. Therefore both of them shall be put to death by stoning. If a man has intercourse with his daughter-in-law, both of them shall be put to death. Since they have committed an utterly detestable perversion, they shall be stoned to death. If a man has intercourse with another man in the same manner as with a woman, both of them have committed a disgusting perversion, they shall be put to death by stoning. If a man marries a woman and a mother, it is a perversion, and both he and the second one taken shall be burned with fire. If a man performs a sexual act with an animal, he must be put to death, and the animal shall also be killed. If a woman presents herself to an animal and allows it to mate with her, you shall kill both the woman and the animal. They shall be put to death by stoning. If a man takes his sister, even a half-sister, who is only the daughter of his father or the daughter of his mother, and they both agree to a sexual act, it is an extremely shameful perversion, and they shall be cut off spiritually before the people. Since he has committed incense with his sister, he shall bear his guilt. If a man has intercourse with a woman who is ritually impure from her menstruation, he has committed a sexual offense with her. He has violated her womb, and she has revealed the source of her blood. Therefore both of them shall be cut off spiritually from among the people. Do not commit incense with your mother's sister or with your father's sister. If one thus violates his blood relative, he shall bear his guilt. If a man has intercourse with his aunt, thus committing a sexual offense against his uncle, both the man and woman shall bear their guilt and die without children. If a man takes his brother's wife when she must be avoided, he has committed a sexual offense against his brother, and both the man and woman shall be childless. Safeguard all my decrees and laws and keep them, so that the land to which I am bringing you to settle will not vomit you out. Do not follow the customs of the nation that I am driving out before you, since they did all the above mentioned perversions, and I was disgusted with them. I therefore said to you, take over the land, I will give it to you so that you can inherit it, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am God your Lord who has separated you out from among all the nations. You must likewise separate out the clean animals and birds from the unclean. Do not make yourselves disgusting through animals, birds or other creatures that I have separated out for you as a being unclean. You shall be holy to me, for I, God, am holy, and I have separated you out from among the nations to be mine. Any man or woman who is involved in the practices of the mediums or oracles shall be put to death. They shall be pelted to death with stones, and thus stoned to death. Emor. God told Moses to declare the following to Aaron's descendants, the priest. Let no priest defile himself by contact with the dead among his people, except for such close blood relatives as his mother, father, son, daughter or brother. He may also allow himself to become ritually unclean for his deceased virgin sister, who is also close to him as long as she is not married. However, a husband may not defile himself for his dead wife if she is legally unfit for him. Let no priest shave off patches of hair from his head. Let them not shave the edges of their beards and not make gouges in their skin. They must be holy to their God and not profane their God's name. Since they present God's fire offerings, the food offering for their God, they must remain holy. They shall not marry an immoral or profaned woman. They also must not marry a woman who has been divorced from her husband. The priest must thus be holy to his God. You must strive to keep him holy. Since the present is the food offering to God, he must be holy. Since I am God, I am holy and I am making you holy. If a priest's daughter defiles herself by committing adultery, she has defiled her father's position and she must be burned with fire. These are the rules for the high priest among his brothers, upon whose head the anointing oil has been poured, and who has been inaugurated to wear the special priestly vestments. He shall not go without a haircut, and shall not allow his vestments to be torn. He shall not come in contact with any dead body. He shall thus not defile himself, even for his father or mother. In such a case he may not even leave the sanctuary. He will then not profane his God's sanctuary, since his God's anointing oil is upon him. I am God. He must marry a virgin. He must not marry a widow, a divorcee, or a profaned or immoral woman. He may only marry a virgin from his own people. He will then not profane his children because of his wife. He must do all this because I am God, and I make him holy. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to Aaron as follows. Anyone among your descendants who has a blemish may not approach to present his God's food offering. Thus any blemished priest may not offer sacrifice. This includes anyone who is blind or lame, or who has a deformed nose or a misshapen limb. Also included is anyone who has a crippled leg, a crippled hand, who is a hunchback or a dwarf, who has a blemish in the eye, who has severe eczema or ringworm, or who has a hernia. Any descendant of Aaron the priest who has a blemish may not approach to present God's fire offering. As long as he has a blemish, he may not approach to present his God's food offering. Still he may eat the food offerings of his God, both from the Holy of Holies and from the Holy. But he may not come to the cloth partition in the sanctuary, and he may not approach the altar if he has a blemish. He shall thus not defile that which is holy to me, since I am God, and I sanctify it. Moses told this to Aaron, his sons, and all the Israelites. God spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, and tell them to be careful regarding the sacred offerings that the Israelites consecrate to me, so that they not desecrate my holy name. I am God. Tell them that if any man among the descendants is an unclean state, when he presents the sacred offering that the Israelites consecrate to God, he shall be cut off spiritually from before me. I am God. Any descendant of Aaron who has a leprous mark or a male discharge may not eat any sacred offerings until he has purified himself. The same is true of one who touches anyone defiled by the dead, who has had a seminal emission, or who has touched any unclean small animal, or any person who can defile him. A person who touches any of the above shall be unclean until evening, and he shall not eat any sacred offering unless he has immersed in a mikvah. He then becomes ritually clean at sunset, and he can eat the sacred offerings which are his portion. The priest shall not eat any creature that has died on its own, and which is forbidden only because it has a fatal lesion, since this will defile him. I am God. The priest shall thus keep my charge and not profane the sacred offering, which is a sin that can cause them to die. I am God, and I am making them holy. No non-priest may eat the sacred offering. Even if a person resides with a priest or is hired by him, that person may not eat the sacred offering. However, if a priest buys a slave for money as his own property, then the slave may eat the sacred offering. Similarly, a slave born in his house may eat his food. When a priest's daughter marries a non-priest, she may no longer eat the sacred elevated gift. But if the priest's daughter has no children and is widowed or divorced, she may return to her father's house with the same status as when she was a girl, and she may eat her father's food. No non-priest may eat the elevated gift. If a person inadvertently eats such a sacred offering, He must add 1/5 to it and give it to the priest along with an appropriate substitute for the sacred offering. Non-priests thus shall not profane the sacred offerings which the Israelites give as elevated gifts in God's name. If they eat the sacred offerings, they will bear the guilt of sin, since I am God, and it is I who make these offerings holy. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to Aaron, to his sons, and to all the Israelites, saying to them, "This is the law: if any person, whether of the family of Israel or of the proselytes who join them, offers any animal that can be presented to God as a burnt offering to fulfill a general or a specific pledge. To gain acceptance, it must be an unblemished male taken from the cattle, sheep, or goats. Do not present any blemished animal, since it will not be accepted for you." Similarly, when a person presents a peace offering of cattle or sheep to fulfill a general or specific pledge, it must be unblemished in order to be acceptable. It shall not have any blemish on it. Thus you may not offer to God any animal that is blind, broken, limbed, or gashed, or that has warts, mank, or ringworm. You may not place such an animal on the altar as a fire offering to God. However, if an ox or sheep has an extra or missing limb, it can be offered as a gift to the sanctuary, but none of the above shall be acceptable as a pledge for the altar. Similarly, you may not offer to God any animal that has its testicles crushed, whether by hand or with an instrument pulled loose or severed. This is something that you must never do, no matter where you live. You may not offer any such animal, even if it is presented by a Gentile. Animals that are maimed and blemished shall not be acceptable for you. God spoke to Moses, saying, "When a bull, sheep, or goat is born, it must remain with its mother for 7 days. Then after the 8th day it shall be acceptable as sacrifice for a fire offering to God. Whether it is a bull, a sheep, or a goat, do not slaughter a female animal and its child on the same day. When you sacrifice a thanksgiving offering to God, you must do so in an acceptable manner. It must be eaten on the same day, with nothing left over until the next morning. I am God. Be careful regarding my commandments and keep them. I am God. Do not desecrate my holy name. I must be sanctified among the Israelites. I am God, and I am making you holy and bringing you out to Egypt to be your God. I am God." God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites and say to them, "They are special times that you must celebrate as sacred holidays to God. The following are my special times. You may do work during the 6 weekdays, but Saturday is a Sabbath of Sabbaths. It is a sacred holiday to God, when you shall do no work. Wherever you may live, it is God's Sabbath. These are God's festivals that you must celebrate as sacred holidays at their appropriate times. The afternoon on the 14th day of the first month is the time that you must sacrifice God's Passover offering. Then on the 15th of that month, it is God's festival of matzahs, when you eat matzahs for 7 days. The first day shall be a sacred holiday to you, when you may not do any service work. You shall then bring sacrifices to God for 7 days. The 7th day is a sacred holiday when you may not do any service work." God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites and say to them, "When you come to the land that I am going to give you, and you reap its harvest, you must bring an omer of your first reaping to the priest. He shall wave it in the motions prescribed for a wave offering to God, so that it will be acceptable for you. The priest shall make this wave offering on the day after the first day of the Passover holiday. On the day you make the wave offering of the omer, you shall prepare an unblemished yearling sheep as a burnt offering to God. Its meal offering shall be 2/10 of an ephah of wheat meal mixed with oil, a fire offering to God. Its libation offering shall be 1/4 hin of wine. Until the day that you bring this sacrifice to your God, you may not eat bread, roasted grain, or fresh grain. This shall be an eternal law for all generations, no matter where you live. You shall then count 7 complete weeks after the day following the Passover holiday, when you brought the omer as a wave offering, until the day after the 7th week, when there will be a total of 50 days. On that 50th day, you may present new grain as a meal offering to God. From the land upon which you live, you shall bring 2 loaves of bread as a wave offering. They shall be made of 2/10 of an ephah of wheat meal, and shall be baked as leavened bread. They are the first harvest offering to God. Together with this bread you shall sacrifice 7 unblemished yearling sheep, 1 young bull, and 2 rams. These along with their meal offerings and libations shall be a burnt offering to God, a fire offering as an appeasing fragrance to God. You shall also prepare 1 goat as a sin offering and 2 yearling sheep as peace sacrifices. The priest shall make the motions prescribed for a wave offering before God with the bread for the first harvest offering and the 2 sheep. They belong to the priest as something sacred to God. This very day shall be celebrated as a sacred holiday when no service work may be done. This is an eternal law for all generations, no matter where you may live. Furthermore, when you reap your land's harvest, do not completely harvest the ends of your fields. Also do not pick up individual stock that may have fallen. You must leave all these for the poor and the stranger. I am God your Lord. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites and say, the first day of the 7th month shall be a day of rest. It is a sacred holiday for remembrance and sounding of the ram's horn. Do not do any service work on that day. Bring a fire offering to God. God spoke to Moses saying, the 10th of the 7th month shall be the day of atonement for you. It is a sacred holiday when you must fast and bring a fire offering to God. Do not do any work on this day. It is a day of atonement when you gain atonement before God your Lord. If anyone does not fast on this day, he shall be cut off spiritually from his people. Similarly, if one does any work on this day, I will destroy him spiritually from among his people. Do not do any work on this day. This is an eternal law for all generations, no matter where you may live. It is a Sabbath of Sabbaths to you, and a day when you must fast. You must keep this holiday from the 9th of the month until the next night. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites as follows. The 15th of this 7th month shall be the festival of Sukkot to God, lasting 7 days. The first day shall be sacred holiday when you may not do any service work. For 7 days then you shall present a fire offering to God. The 8th day is a sacred holiday to you when you shall bring a fire offering to God. It is a time of retreat when you may do no service work. The above are God's special times which you must keep as sacred holidays. They are times when you must present to God a burnt offering, a meal offering, a sacrifice and libations, each depending on the particular day. This is in addition to God's Sabbath offerings and the gifts and the specific and general pledges that you offer to God. On the 15th of the 7th month, when you harvest the land's grain, you shall celebrate a festival to God for 7 days. The first day shall be a day of rest, and the 8th day shall be a day of rest. On the first day you must take for yourself a fruit of the citron tree, an unopened palm frond, myrtle branches and willows that grow near the brook. You shall rejoice before God for 7 days. During these 7 days each year you shall celebrate to God. It is an eternal law for all generations that you celebrate this festival in the 7th month. During these 7 days you must live in thatched huts. Everyone including in Israel must live in such thatched huts. This is so that future generations will know that I had the Israelites live in huts when I brought them out of Egypt. I am God your Lord. Moses related the rules of
Bihar. God spoke to Moses at Mount Sinai, telling him to speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you come to the land that I am giving you, the land must be given a rest period, a Sabbath to God. For 6 years you may plant your fields, prune your vineyards and harvest your crops. But the 7th year is a Sabbath of Sabbaths for the land. It is God's Sabbath during which you may not plant your fields nor prune your vineyards. Do not harvest crops that grow on their own, and do not gather the grapes on your unpruned vine, since it is a year of rest for the land. What grows while the land is resting may be eaten by you, by your male and female slaves, and by the employees and resident hands who live with you. All the crops shall also be eaten by the domestic and wild animals that are in your land. You shall count 7 sabbatical years, that is, 7 times 7 years. The period of the 7 sabbatical cycles shall thus be 49 years. Then on the 10th day of the 7th month you shall make a proclamation with the ram's horn. This proclamation with the ram's horn is thus to be made on Yom Kippur. You shall sanctify the 50th year, declaring emancipation of slaves all over the world. This is your Jubilee year, when each man shall return to his hereditary property and to his family. The 50th year shall also be a jubilee to you, in so far as you may not sow, harvest crops growing of their own accord, nor gather grapes from unpruned vines during that year. The Jubilee shall thus be holy to you. You shall eat the crops from the field that year. In the Jubilee year, every man shall return to his hereditary property. Thus, when you buy or sell land to your neighbor, do not cheat one another. You are buying only according to the number of years after the Jubilee. Therefore, he is selling it to you for the number of years that the land will produce crops until the next Jubilee. Since he is selling it to you for the number of crops, you must increase the price if it will be for many years, and decrease it if there are few. You will then not be cheating one another. You shall fear your God, since it is I who am God your Lord. Keep my decrees and safeguard my laws. If you keep them, you will live in the land securely. The land will produce its fruit, and you will eat your fill, thus living securely in the land. In the 7th year, you might ask, what will we eat in the Jubilee year? We have not planted nor have we harvested crops. I will direct my blessings to you in the 6th year, and the land will produce enough crops for 3 years. You will therefore be eating your old crops when you plant. After the 8th year, you will still be eating your old crops until the crops of the 9th year are ripe. Since the land is mine, no land shall be sold permanently. You are foreigners and resident aliens as far as I am concerned, and therefore there shall be time of redemption for all your hereditary lands. If your brother becomes impoverished and sells some of his hereditary land, a close relative can come and redeem what his kinsman has sold. The same is true if a man does not have anyone to redeem it, but gains enough wealth to be able to redeem it himself. He shall then calculate the number of years for which the land has been sold, and return the balance to the buyer. He can then return to his hereditary land. If he does not have the means to retrieve the land, then that which he has sold shall remain with the buyer until the Jubilee year. It is then released by the Jubilee, so that the original owner can return to his hereditary land. When a man sells a residential house in a walled city, he shall be able to redeem it until the end of 1 year after he has sold it. He has 1 full year to the day to redeem it. However, if it is not redeemed by the end of this year, then the house in the walled city shall become the permanent property of the buyer, to be passed down to his descendants. It shall not be released by the Jubilee. On the other hand, houses in villages that do not have walls around them shall be considered the same as open land. They shall thus be redeemable and shall be released by the Jubilee. As far as the Levites' cities are concerned, the Levites shall always have the power to redeem the houses in their hereditary cities. Thus, if one buys a house or city from the Levites, it must be released by the Jubilee. This is because houses in the Levite cities are their hereditary property among the Israelites. Similarly, the open areas surrounding their cities shall not be sold permanently, because it is their hereditary property forever. When your brother becomes impoverished and loses the ability to support himself in the community, you must come to his aid. Help him survive, whether he is a proselyte or a native Israelite. Do not take advance interest or accrued interest from him. Fear your God and let your brother live alongside you. Do not make him pay advance interest for your money, and do not give him food for which he will have to pay accrued interest. I am God your Lord, who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be a God for you. If your brother becomes impoverished and is sold to you, do not work him like a slave. He shall be with you just like an employee or a resident hand. He shall serve you only until the Jubilee year, and then he and his children shall be free to leave you and to return to their family. He shall thus return to the hereditary land of his ancestors. This is because I brought the Israelites out of Egypt, and they are my slaves. They shall not be sold in the market as slaves. Do not dominate such a slave to break his spirit, since you must fear your God. You can also have other male or female slaves. These are the male and female slaves that you buy from the nations around you. You can also buy such slaves from the resident aliens who live among you, and from the families that are born in your land. All these shall become hereditary property. They are hereditary property that you shall pass down to your children, and you shall thus have them serve you forever. However, where your fellow Israelites are concerned, you must not dominate one another to break one's spirit. This is the law. If a foreigner or resident alien gains the upper hand while your brother loses his means of support and is sold to a foreigner, resident alien, or to an idolatrous cult which must be rooted out from a foreigner's family, after he is sold, he must be redeemed, and one of his close relatives must redeem him first. His uncle or cousin shall thus redeem him, or the closest other relative from his family shall redeem him. If he obtains the means, he can also be redeemed on his own. In all such cases, he shall make a reckoning with the one who brought him according to the number of years from the time he was sold until the Jubilee. He purchased price shall then be counted for that number of years as if he were hired for that amount. Thus, if there are still many years until the Jubilee, the redemption money that he returns to his buyer shall be in proportion to the money for which he was sold. If only a few years remain until the Jubilee year, he shall make a similar reckoning. In either case, he shall return a sum of redemption money according to the number of years that he has already worked. Such a slave shall thus be the same as an employee hired on a yearly basis. If you are aware of it, you may not let his master dominate him so as to break his spirit. If the slave is not redeemed through any of the above means, he and his children shall be freed in the Jubilee year. All this is because the Israelites are actually my slaves. They are my slaves because I brought them out of Egypt. I am God, your Lord. Therefore, do not make yourselves false gods. Do not raise up a stone idol or a sacred pillar for yourselves. Do not place a kneeling stone in your land so that you can prostrate yourselves on it. I am God, your Lord. Keep my Sabbaths and revere my sanctuary. I am God. Bechukute. If you follow my laws and are careful to keep my commandments, I will provide you with rain at the right time, so that the land will bear its crops and the trees of the field will provide fruit. You will have so much that your threshing season will last until your grape harvest, and your grape harvest will last until the time you plant. You will have your fill of food, and you will live securely in the land. I will grant peace in the land so that you will sleep without fear. I will rid the land of dangerous animals, and the sword will not pass through your land. You will chase away your enemies, and they will fall before your sword. 5 of you will be able to chase away 100, and 100 of you will defeat 10,000 as your enemies fall before your sword. I will turn to you, making you fertile and numerous, thus keeping my covenant with you. You will continue eating the previous year's crops long after their time, and you will eventually have to clear out the old crops because of the new. I will keep my sanctuary in your midst and not grow tired of you. I will make my presence felt among you, thus I will be a God to you, and you will be a nation dedicated to me. I am God your Lord. I brought you out from Egypt, where you were slaves. I broke the bands of your yoke and led you forth with your heads held high. But this is what will happen if you do not listen to me and do not keep all these commandments. If you come to denigrate my decrees and grow tired of my laws, then you will not keep all my commandments, and you will have broken my covenant. I will then do the same to you. I will bring upon you feelings of anxiety along with depression and excitement, destroying your outlook and making life hopeless. You will plant your crop in vain because your enemies will eat it. I will direct my anger against you so that you will be defeated by your foes and your enemies will dominate you. You will flee even when no one is chasing you. If you still do not listen to me, I will increase the punishment for your sins sevenfold. I will break your aggressive pride, making your skies like iron and your land like brass. You will exhaust your strength in vain, since your land will not yield its crops and the trees of the land will not produce fruit. If you are indifferent to me and lose the desire to obey me, I will again increase the punishment for your sins sevenfold. I will send wild beasts among you, killing your children, destroying your livestock, and reducing your population so that the roads will become deserted. If this is not enough to discipline you and you are still indifferent to me, then I will also be indifferent to you, but I will again increase the punishment for your sins sevenfold. I will bring a vengeful sword against you to avenge my covenant, so that you will huddle in your cities. I will send the plague against you and give you over to your enemies. I will cut off your food supply so that 10 women will be able to break bread in one oven, bringing back only a small amount of bread. You will eat, but you will not be satisfied. If you still do not obey me and remain indifferent to me, then I will be indifferent to you with a vengeance, bringing yet another sevenfold increase in the punishment for your sins. You will eat the flesh of your sons and make a meal of the flesh of your daughters. When I destroy your altars and smash your sun gods, I will let your corpses rot on the remains of your idols. I will thus have grown tired of you. I will let your cities fall into ruins and make your sanctuaries desolate. No longer will I accept the appeasing fragrance of your sacrifices. I will make the land so desolate that even your enemies who live there will be astonished. I will scatter you among the nations and keep the sword drawn against you. Your land will remain desolate and your cities in ruins. Then as long as the land is desolate and you are in your enemy's land, the land will enjoy its Sabbaths. The land will rest and enjoy its sabbatical years. Thus, as long as it is desolate, the land will enjoy the sabbatical rest that you would not give it when you lived there. I will bring such insecurity upon those of you who survive in your enemy's land that the sound of a rustling leaf will make them flee from the sword. They will fall with no one chasing them. They will fall over one another as if chased by the sword, even when there is no one pursuing. You will have no means of standing up before your foes. You will thus be destroyed among the nations. The land of your enemies will consume you. The few of you who survive in your enemies' lands will realize that your survival is threatened. As a result of your non-observance, these few will also realize that their survival has been threatened because of the non-observance of their fathers. They will then confess their sins and the sins of their fathers for being false and remaining indifferent to me. It was for this that I also remained indifferent to them and brought them into their enemy's land. But when the time finally comes that their stubborn spirit is humbled, I will forgive their sin. I will remember my covenant with Jacob as well as my covenant with Isaac and my covenant with Abraham. I will remember the land. For the land will have been left behind by them and will have enjoyed its Sabbaths while it lay in desolation without them. The sin they had committed by denigrating my laws and growing tired of my decrees will also have been expiated. Thus even when they are in their enemy's land, I will not grow so disgusted with them, nor so tired of them that I would destroy them and break my covenant with them, since I am God their Lord. I will therefore remember the covenant with their original ancestors whom I brought out of Egypt in the sight of the nations, so as to be a God to them. I am God. These are the decrees, laws and codes that God set between himself and the Israelites at Mount Sinai through the hand of Moses. God spoke to Moses, telling him to speak to the Israelites and say to them, "This is the law. When a person expresses a vow to donate to God the endowment valuation of a person, the endowment valuation of a 20 to 60-year-old male shall be 50 shekels according to the sanctuary standard. For a woman, this endowment valuation shall be 30 shekels. For a person between 5 and 20 years old, the endowment valuation shall be 20 shekels for a male and 10 shekels for a female. For a person between 1 month and 5 years old, the endowment valuation shall be 5 silver shekels for a male and 3 silver shekels for a female. For a person over 60 years old, the endowment valuation shall be 15 shekels for a man and 10 shekels for a woman. If a person is too poor to pay the endowment, he shall present himself before the priest so that the priest can determine the endowment valuation. The priest shall then make his determination on the basis of how much the person making the vow can afford. If the endowment is an animal that can be offered as a sacrifice to God, then anything donated to God automatically becomes consecrated. One may neither exchange it nor offer a substitute for it, whether it be a better animal for a worse one or a worse animal for a better one. If he replaces one animal with another, both the original animal and its replacement shall be consecrated. If it involves any unfit animal that cannot be offered as a sacrifice to God, the owner shall present the animal to the priest. The priest shall set the endowment value according to the animal's good and bad qualities, and its endowment valuation shall be that which is determined by the priest. If the owner wishes to redeem it, he must add 20% to its endowment value. If a person consecrates his house as something sacred to God, the priest shall set its endowment value according to its good and bad points. The endowment value shall then remain that which is determined by the priest. If the one who consecrates it wishes to redeem his house, he must add an additional 20% to its endowment value, and it then reverts to him. If a man consecrates a field from his hereditary property to God, its endowment value shall be calculated according to the amount of seed required to sow it, 50 silver shekels for each chomer of barley seed. This is the endowment valuation that must be paid if the field is consecrated immediately after the Jubilee year. However, if one consecrates his field later after the Jubilee year, then the priest shall calculate the value on the basis of how many years remain until the next Jubilee year, and its endowment value shall be reduced accordingly. If the person who has consecrated his field redeems it, he must add 20% to its endowment valuation, and it then reverts to him. However, if he does not redeem the field, or if the sanctuary treasurer sells it to someone else, it can no longer be redeemed. When the field is then released by the Jubilee, it becomes consecrated to God like a field that has been declared taboo, and it then becomes the hereditary property of the priest. If the field that one consecrates to God is not his hereditary property, but a field he has bought, the priest shall calculate the proportion of its endowment valuation on the basis of the number of years remaining until the next Jubilee year. On that day, anyone can redeem it by giving its endowment valuation as something consecrated to God. In any case, on the Jubilee year, the field shall revert to the one from whom it was brought, the one who had it as his hereditary property in the land. Every endowment valuation shall be according to the sanctuary standard, where the shekel is 20 gerahs. A firstling animal which must be sacrificed as a firstborn offering to God may not be consecrated by an individual. Whether it is an ox, sheep, or goat, it automatically belongs to God. If a non-kosher animal is consecrated, it shall be redeemed for its endowment valuation plus an additional 20%. If it is not redeemed, it shall be sold for its endowment value. However, anything taboo that a person declares to be taboo to God cannot be sold or redeemed. This is true, or anything he owns, whether it is a slave or animal or his hereditary field, everything that is taboo is holy of holies to God. If a human being is declared taboo, he cannot be redeemed and must be put to death. The land's tithes, whether of the crops of the soil or the fruit of trees, belong to God and are thus consecrated to God. If a person wishes to redeem such tithes, he must add an additional 20%. All tithes of the herds and flocks shall be given when they are counted under the rod, with every 10th one being consecrated to God. No distinction may be made between better and worse animals, and no substitutions may be made. If a substitution is made, then both the original animal and its replacement shall be consecrated and not redeemable. These are the commandments that God gave Moses to the Israelites at Mount Sinai.